Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Anything Joe's, a collaborative journey through the world of G.I. Joe. My name is Greg Engel,
And I'm Jaren Decker.
and we'll be your host today. Today on Anything Joe's, we're talking about Marvel's A Real American Hero, G.I. Joe number 3. G.I. Joe number 3 is a very interesting book, and we will talk a little bit as we go through it, but this is the first technical origin or introduction of science fiction elements into the G.I. Joe universe, which is something of a controversial topic with G.I. Joe fans. I think some people like to see the G.I. Joe universe as a strictly military themed, borderline as authentic as possible. And then some people, particularly in my opinion, people that grew up on the cartoon, are a little bit more willing to embrace kind of the fantastical elements of it. When we do make our way into the cartoon, it gets, honestly, fantasy also, I think, is a big part of it that gets kind of partnered together. But for the purposes of this episode, we're going to go over the issue, and then we'll talk a little bit about how science fiction works in the G.I. Joe universe.
Yeah, this is definitely the biggest departure. I mean, I know we're only 3 issues in, but the first 2 were like, yeah, that could definitely happen in our world. And then this one, you're like, okay, well, even just looking at the cover of the issue, you're like, well, this is a little bit different.
Yeah, this is a gigantic hulking robot. I would love to know what the motivator was for Larry, but to like kind of lean into this more. But maybe he just saw a gigantic robot on TV and was like, okay, I can do that, no sweat. Let's take a look at this cover. This cover is done by Bob Hall and Al Milgrom. Bob Hall, who is someone that I know specifically from the Squadron Supreme series from Marvel. Al Milgrom, of course, is the co-creator of Firestorm, which is what I know him from. I met Bob Hall at a comic book convention a couple of years back, and he was a very nice gentleman. He did not have a lot to say about this cover. I don't think he remembered it very well. He did a lot of fill-in work, as in the 80s especially, so he was probably he did this cover and the cover for issue 4, and that was basically it.
So did you ask him about this cover? And he was just like, oh, yeah, I did that one.
No, he was pretty busy, although he did seem kind of, he seemed charmed, I guess, that this was what I had brought him to sign. He probably sees a lot of unusual things.
So you had him sign this issue.
Yeah, he signed my number 3 and my number 4. I brought a Squadron Supreme for him. And then I had him sign the reprints of 3 and 4 also, because I have like the Tales of G.I. Joe series, which is where they had put out they put out like the first 15 issues again where it was really at the height of its popularity.
Okay.
This cover takes some flack, specifically because the Joes that are featured on the cover are not easily recognizable. If you look on the left-hand side, that's obviously Scarlet. And if you look at the right-hand side, kind of shrouded in the off color, I'm going to take a guess and say that's probably Stalker, just based on maybe the shape of the beret. But the other 3 guys that we've got, especially the dude that's looking basically right at the camera, maybe not camera, but you get the idea. He's looking at you, the reader. Mm-hmm. That could be just about anybody. And maybe they could all be green shirts, even though we don't have, there's nothing in the book that seems to imply that they're being used in it. Could be Grunt. Grunt obviously is also the most, if you compare it to the little icon box in the upper left hand corner. I don't know. There's a possibility that Bob just didn't have any specific artistic direction and was just like, here's some G.I. Joes. But he has all the staples of a regular Joe from this era. He's wearing the regular green jumpsuit. He's got the visor on the helmet. Who knows? Doesn't change the fact, in my opinion, that this cover is it really draws you in. Like as a young child, this cover, I think, it really captures the fantastical, and this is from an era where comics would put stuff on the cover that actually happened in the book. So the idea of seeing this on the newsstand and being like, "Holy moly, how are they going to get out of this? That thing's gigantic." It's great. It draws me in. Even now looking at it, I'm like, heck yeah.
Yeah, if there's one thing, I like people shooting laser guns, but if there's one thing I like more than people shooting laser guns, it's giant robots shooting lasers.
So let's open this bad boy up and take a look at issue number 3, the Trojan Gambit. Issue 3 is, of course, written by Larry Hama, pencils by Herb Trimpe, and it opens on a end of a battle that we weren't privy to. You can see that the G.I. Joe team they've secured a Cobra stronghold. They captured some sort of battle robot, even though we've just seen them on the cover, so we know it's a big part of the story. And they're dismantling it. There's a really great Peace Through War Cobra banner that's hanging up in the back. It has bullet holes in it to kind of imply that they had quite the tussle. You can see like Scarlet's helping Rock and Roll tend to an injury, and Breaker's reporting into General Flag to say, hey, everything's okay. We got things taken care of. And it says, were there any serious injuries? Yeah, half a dozen Cobra troopers that they had old Snake Eyes disarmed. You shouldn't even be allowed to carry that thing in his boot. It's got to be against the Geneva Convention. This is the second issue in a row where Snake Eyes has an ace in his boot, so to speak, because in issue 2 he had like ammo clips and stuff that he pulled out of his boots. They should probably start shooting him in the feet.
Yeah. Instead of disarming him, they should disfeet him.
Right. So they choose not to take the robot's control console because it got all shot up by Rock and Roll. They are Breaker's talking to General Flag on the video. I don't know what that would be. Some kind of teleconference thing.
FaceTiming him. They're FaceTiming him.
Yeah, so advanced. So he tells them that you're going to take 3 vehicles disguised as mail trucks. You're going to take it back to the pit, run some preliminary scans on that robot, and then the tech team from Aberdeen will be up to give it the hairy eyeball. That's a classic Larry Hama trope, something he uses at least a couple times that I can think of right off the top of my head. So they pull up all these mail trucks, and they've got prisoners in the first truck, they've got robots in the second truck, and Scarlet and Hawk are going to be in the third truck with the wounded. The prisoners are going to the stockade at Fort Hamilton. The wounded are going in the back door of the VA hospital. And then Clutch, Breaker, Steeler all going back with the robot.
If I may, something that it was one of those things that stuck out to me at first because I was like, okay, well, that's weird. So he says he asked if they're going to take the control console, and he said, nah, he must have pumped 200 rounds of 7.62 NATO into those circuit boards. And I was like, 7.62, most people, and myself included, think of that as the round that the AK-47 used. Which I was like, okay, well, that's weird. But the NATO actually gives it is slightly different, and it would be used with an M60 light machine gun, which you would see Rock and Roll using. So it was one of those things that I had to Google because I was like, it's weird that they used NATO, but it is actually a different variation. It's a different caliber, technically.
That's very interesting. I think it is little details like that make a lot of fans, especially early fans, get drawn in by that level of detail. I would have not known that. I didn't know that until you told me just now. So
it's just one of those things that stuck out at me, and I was like, okay, I gotta do a little bit of Googling because I thought it had to have been at least something that was actually different if they kind of put that in there.
Sure, I think it's safe to say that the stuff that Larry doesn't know right at the top of his head, he put in the time and did the research and thought, he would not mismatch weapons and ammunition. Like he knew what it would be using and what it would take.
Yeah, so that's why it was important that he used NATO instead of just saying, "Oh, he put 7.62 into there," because then everyone would have been like, "Why do you use a commie weapon?"
So on the next page, we see that the Cobras they've got 1 foot ahead of them already because phase 1 of the plan has been completed. Cobra Commander says that was the easy part. The next phase will be very tricky indeed. So we know right off the bat that the ball is rolling, that Cobra is up to something. As they're taking the Verrazano Narrows Bridge, which is an actual, there's a lot of actual locations being used here to kind of put the G.I. Joe headquarters in a real place, much like when you read a Spider-Man book and it's in New York. They use a lot of real locations to kind of ground it with a sense of reality. And they say, Clutch says, hey, we can't let the cargo stand still. We'd have a heap of trouble if an unauthorized civilian took a peek in the back. Imagine what these Staten Islanders would think if they knew what was rolling through their streets in the dead of night. And he says, that ain't nothing, Clutch. What if they knew what was under the chaplain's assistant school in Fort Wadsworth? So back at Fort Wadsworth, they load him up on the little elevator and they send them down through the pit. And this is an interesting full page spread broken up into a couple panels where we see kind of a cutaway of the pit where they're explaining kind of like how the defense of the pit is layered. So he says if the bad guys popped a small nuke on Fort Wadsworth, which is highly unlikely, the motor pool would be instantly vaporized. Absolutely no concern for the actual chaplain's assistants that work at Fort Wadsworth. The crater would extend down at least to the heavy equipment level, including tanks and other vehicles. Shockwave would disintegrate all the equipment on the briefing room level, and the radiation would kill every living thing down as far as the training level. The bottom two levels, with the living quarters, computers, generators, and life support systems, can be sealed off with the automatic blast door system and continue to function with a comparatively favorable survival quotient. He says, does this mean we won't glow in the dark? So this is, if you compare this image with the image that we saw at the end of issue 1, where we kind of saw the big picture of the pit, it basically stacks up pretty well, but also gives you a little bit more of a third dimension to how the original pit is laid out. Even more so because you can see things like, you remember when we were talking about that little training bubble and we didn't know what it was or who was in it? I mean, they've remembered to bring that back. You see living quarters that are also marked on that blueprint. Larry didn't just like make that and then forget it. He used it as a reference point when he was writing other issues. So it's interesting to see how it kind of all comes together. If you were building a pit, that you could build one that is authentic to how it was used in the comic, because Larry doesn't misplace details like that, at least not in this era. And I think that's extremely fascinating. I think the pit is a very cool concept, very cool execution. No existing toy.
Can you imagine that toy? That would definitely rival the flag.
Yeah, and much like the flag, it would not be made to proper scale. They would cut out a bunch of stuff, and it would be.
They'd probably cut out the bubble.
It would. How dare they? The most known location. And it would be kind of obnoxiously vertical. Like it wouldn't have a lot of that style, I guess, that would make
it wouldn't be fun to play with.
Yeah,
You'd be like, all right, we're gonna go down, and then you'd have to like lift the 20-pound toy top level off and then go down one level and then play for a little bit and then do it again. It wouldn't be fun.
So down in the pit, Breaker's complaining about why do they have to stay up and scan this robot, which they've laid out in the exact way that it would look if it was assembled. I thought the eggheads from Aberdeen were going to pick it apart tomorrow. And I said, well, it's for a security breaker. Our friends at Cobra might be pulling a double whammy on us, so they have to check for booby traps and the like. They do a little scan on it, and it shows no active mechanical or electronic devices. So it's not on a timer. There's no explosives. For all intents and purposes, is DOA, or so they think. A few hours later, Hawk and Scarlet have arrived, and they come and tell them, hey, we got to change into our dress screens. We're making a showing at the chaplain's assistant's social tea, which is being held in the motor pool upstairs. And this is to help maintain their cover as a not top secret base. Snake Eyes, Flash, and Stalker will collect your weapons for storage in the arms room, and they're ready to kind of like take a break and have breakfast. So, cut to this chaplain's assistant's social tea, where their guests are inquiring, how do soldiers assigned to a chaplain's motor pool manage to acquire such an impressive array of decorations? Well, ma'am, when we're not driving the Padre to chapel, we're out hunting down international terrorists. A little over-the-top humor in the face of their visitors.
It's like one of those. It's like where he's, he's telling the truth, but they think he's lying.
Right.
It's great.
Where the truth is too ridiculous to be believable.
Yeah.
And one of the women that's visiting there says, "Oh, I smell bacon and eggs." Well, bacon and eggs is drifting up from 5 levels down in the pit's canteen, where they're making eggs and bacon, and they're just kind of taking a break. It looks like Breaker is pouring 3 cups of coffee simultaneously. Pretty skillful. A level down from that, Stalker and Flash and Snake Eyes are checking their guns. Stalker inquires, hey, why does Snake Eyes always volunteer to clean all the weapons himself? He says, well, real simple. He doesn't want your weapon to jam if you're covering him. This is interesting because, as we'll learn later down the line, Stalker and Snake Eyes actually go back all the way to serving in Vietnam together. So, again, it's a no-brainer that Larry hadn't written that far ahead in his mind. We're still in issue 3, still establishing the characters. But Stalker would never ask that question. He has been with Snake Eyes long enough to know that he covers his bases. He should have said, hey, how does he get all that stuff in his boot? Cut to Cobra Commander. The chemical timer in the robot's right hand is due to activate itself in 30 seconds. Good. By now our little sleeper should be in the very heart of the G.I. Joe Command Center, wherever that is. We can't control or communicate with the robot as long as it is within the command center. The facility must be radio and ray shielded as well as thoroughly blast shielded, but the blast shielding is its weakness. To be totally secure, the command center must be fitted with automatic blast doors between all levels and compartments. The central computer programming for activating these blast doors must of necessity be simple and follow a recognizable pattern. And when our robot hand discovers that pattern, I'm going to stop you right there. Okay? So, this four-handed robot hand, which automatically activates, is programmed to somehow find the console that GHO uses for the security. They know that they use blast shielding. Okay? I'm still willing to give you the benefit of the doubt. It's the blast doors must of necessity be simple and follow a recognizable pattern. Cut to a 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, a 7x5 grid of computer buttons. So that's 35 potential buttons, and this robot is going to discover that pattern by guesswork. Like, it's just going to input codes until it gets it. Is that what I'm to believe here on page 7 that I'm reading?
Well, and like it does. Like, do they do that often that it would have to be simple and follow a recognizable pattern?
Okay. Let me approach this from 2 prongs. Number 1. I couldn't log into my Skype last week because I only had 3 tries to remember my password, and I'm the one that set the password. This robot, unless the passcode is 2 numbers, 35 buttons means that there are millions of potential codes that it could be. And so I'm to believe that there's no number of attempts before there's a lockout or an alarm or anybody's notified.
You can just sit there all day, just try and try again.
I mean, yeah, the only other forgivable thing is if we turn the page and the next panel says 25 hours later. Okay. I just have to get that off my chest. It's maybe they could have drawn that less keys on the keypad. I don't know. I get it. It's a gigantic robot that's getting ready to come to life. Let's not dive too far into the pool, but it needed to be said. It will scan the sensors to find all occupied sectors. So they have the codes to the blast doors. They find out where there are people in sections, and the blast door seal, which, as we know, is the armory, where half the team is, and the canteen, which is where the other half are. So they've both been locked in with the blast doors. And once the blast doors have all been secured, the robot hand will activate its other components and proceed to phase 3 of our plan. So, cut to hand turns on another hand. Hand is assembling the robot. Hand has the head, and he's putting it on the body. So, cut to the canteen. Clutch is messing with an access plate. He knows that it's not just a regular attack because the alarms would have gone off first. It's probably just a computer foul up. They open it up, and there's an arm bar and a 200-pound counterweight that locks the blast door. But without a crowbar or pipe wrench, we're not going to be able to budge it. Best to sit tight and wait for help. Cut to Steeler peeling off the green shirt. I don't buy this computer foul up nonsense. Something's fishy, and I aim to find out what's inside. And never had to replace a bogey wheel and a tank in the field. Just grab that chair and jam it into the door now. So he lifts the 200-pound counterweight, and that opens the door just enough for them to get a chair inside. I will have to say that this particular scene, as a young reader, really stuck with me because Steeler, it's one of those things early on where you see a part of Steeler that we haven't seen before, that he's like a big, got a lot of determination and grit, got a pretty good muscle mass, which you wouldn't know right off the bat, and you certainly wouldn't know from looking at the characters because all the figures were kind of generically the same. So I've always remembered this. Just like Breaker Chews Bubblegum is like a defining characteristic, this for me, especially because Steeler doesn't have a long lifespan in these comics. I don't mean he dies. I just mean he's not used much at all. So this was a very defining characteristic. Unfortunately, this will not come up ever again.
They should have named him Crowbar instead of Steeler. Like he should have just been like, we don't need a crowbar, you got me, and then just picks up that counterweight like it's nothing.
I think it's very interesting. I mean, in all fairness, I don't think a 200-pound deadweight is that heavy. I mean, like, I'm flexing my arms for the podcast, like, but it's still something. It is something that stuck with me. And again, when you're trying to define characters that over the whole of the G.I. Joe universe don't by nature have a lot of definition. This was a big deal for me as a kid.
Yeah, 200 pounds definitely seems a little lighter than I would have thought. But he did it with the weirdest form ever, so he's jacked.
Blew out both of his knees. So they're on the move. Cut to the armory room. So Flash is like, our first priority is getting out. Any of the heavier weapons in here could easily knock this door down, but the blast would probably kill us. Totally unacceptable. At full power, the laser rifle would do the trick, but it would eat up too much oxygen too fast. We'd suffocate before the door was burnt through. Equally unacceptable. Our only chance is the laser rifle on low power, concentrating on the lock mechanism. And then immediately, Stalker and Snake Eyes are like, well, that sounds like a plan. We're going to go to sleep to conserve air. So this is pretty cool, actually, because you have to think the stress that would be surrounding that moment. For the two of the guys, Snake Eyes, sure, let's all put Snake Eyes to the side. Snake Eyes can probably enter a trance during when a bomb is going off. But for them to both be like, we're going to sleep to conserve oxygen. Like, dude, I couldn't sleep if I've been up for 18 hours straight sometimes. I don't think in the heat of the moment where you're like, well, you just might not wake up at all, no big deal, that you could just bunk out or without having a little bit of anxiety. So Flash has got a plan. While that plan is becoming actualized, the guys that are out are already on the move. And they're running between the 5th and 6th levels. They've kind of been clued in that there's something that's definitely fishy. And Clutch is like, it's got to be that robot. And they're like, well, we scanned it inside and out. It's inert. And it's been dismantled. I hope you don't think it got off the table and reassembled itself. As they open the computer room, boom, big splash panel. Robot is assembled. Robot is using every classic comic book explosive word you got. You want a wham? Boom, you got a wham. You want a blam? You got a blam. You want a badoom? There's a badoom. All the sound effects you could possibly want from a villain all at once. Now, I gotta admit, and I love Herb Trimpe, and he is a very influential voice in the comics for G.I. Joe. But looking at this picture of the robot and reflecting back to that really sweet robot on the cover, not as impactful. So the Joes all dive out of the way as the robot shoots at him from kind of all sides. Both of his hands shoot laser blasts. He's got like a third eye that shoots a laser as well. And so they're like, well, that robot's between us and the arms room, which is probably locked anyway. Let's take a retreat back up the stairs and replan. So that's what they do. There's a lot of kind of sweet MacGyver tactics in this issue where Clutch goes into the bathroom and he's starting collecting all of the aftershave into a bucket. And he hears the robot coming up the stairs with the clink, clink, clink. And he faces him head on, splashes him in the face with all that cheap cologne, and then lights up I guess that's a flare probably, and pops it on him. Robot catches on fire. Cut to Cobra Commander. Our robot is programmed to fight its way out of the G.I. Joe Command Center, and when it's in the open, it will transmit a homing beacon that will be picked up by directional receivers and give us the exact location of the G.I. Joe's home base. So, if you were unclear what the robot's true purpose was, not to just wreak havoc and destroy anybody that got in its way, it wants to get close enough to the surface that it can transmit a beam so they'll know where the pit is at. Cut back to kind of the comic relief of this issue, which is Hawk and Scarlet, where they're talking to somebody that's like, oh, I thought I smelled bacon and eggs, and now I'm smelling an electrical fire. Scarlet turns to Hawk to say, oh, do you think, and Hawk's like, don't worry about it. It's probably just some crosswind from the mess hall. Hawk is stone cold keeping that covered. Doesn't care what's going on downstairs. Not gonna blow the op. So, robot's not stopped. It's just caught on fire. And as they hope that the fire will blow out one of its main circuits, they peek out the door, and it's gone. Well, where can it be? How do you hide a 10-foot tall robot that's on fire? They start to explore the level that they're on, and they head into the training area. Interesting enough, we were talking about this earlier, as they head into the training area, once again, kind of laid out to a T to what we've seen not only in this issue, but in issue 1. There's our bubble on the right-hand side of that panel, our immersion spear, as it were. So again, nice commitment to continuity in this. So they go into the pool, and surprise, surprise, the robot submerges itself in the pool to put out the fire. Pretty smart robot.
Very smart.
Yeah, so robot's not on fire. He's shooting at him again. They head for the elevator, which only goes up as far as the garage level. which is gonna have to be as good as it gets. Still, they secured all their weapons at the beginning of the issue, so they have no ammo. All the ammo's locked up in the armory. That's now 6 levels down from where they're at. The robot is actively pursuing them, and he breaks open the elevator panel, and he starts climbing up the, what do you call the cords that hold an elevator?
The things that if they ever break, we're screwed. That's my normal name for them.
The thing that murderers always pop, and then it causes people to die on elevators.
Constant source of anxiety.
Please write to us at anythingjoespodcast@gmail.com and tell me what the name of elevator cables are called. If they're called elevator cables, no email required. So as the robot is climbing up the elevator cables, they send the elevator down on top of it. Doesn't phase it. Robot's like, no biggie. Okay, they're like, fine. We'll take our laser cannon, now available in stores, kids, and dump it right on its head. So they push it out the elevator shaft. Well, the robot stood on one of the floors, and they completely missed. They just destroyed an incredibly expensive piece of equipment.
I'm glad that they explained that none of their heavy machinery was loaded, because if they hadn't, I would have been like, well, why aren't they shooting it? But man, that's a really weird way to keep it. Like, you wouldn't keep a little bit of ammo in there? Like, what if you got to roll out real quick?
I don't know enough about, like, military procedures to know they probably don't just leave a cannon loaded just in case some goofball comes and, leans on the button and it's like, kaboom.
Maybe now they should just start leaving just one. Just put, like, some kind of pin pad lock on it or something. Like, just leave one heavy weapon loaded.
It does beg the question, if you have a laser cannon, what kind of ammo do you need to fire the laser cannon?
Pocket lasers.
Oh, okay. I
Yeah.
mean, you got me. You could have said dilithium crystals, and I'd have been like, sure. I don't know anything about a laser crystal.
Obviously, it's lasers that you just carry around with you.
Oh, okay. It's laser ammo.
Yep.
Just little tiny shells that convert to lasers.
Exactly.
The robot is the floor beneath them. He breaks out the elevator doors, and he started to head for the stairs, so he's just going to make his way back up manually. So they have one flight of stairs, basically, to get ready for another full-on attack. They start pulling some more MacGyver stuff, and they're pulling some paint. They look for some aluminum foil, which they use to chaff enemy radar. And as the robot breaks in to attack them, they hit him in the face with silver paint, which is supposed to put the kibosh on its visual receptors. So that means that the robot will have to switch to radar to track it, and that radar is bouncing off the aluminum foil. So the robot steps on the aluminum foil, which is an open pit of the hydraulic lift well, and the robot falls a full 6 floors down to the bottom and breaks into pieces again.
And they bring back your Badoom, just for good measure.
Badoom. That sound, as I've obviously heard, cut to the T reception, which they hear a gigantic robot explode. They hear the Badoom. Sounded like a Mack truck full of animals going off a cliff. Sure. I mean, okay.
I wouldn't know that's what it would sound like, but I'm glad that man has experienced some things.
Hawk again, master manipulator, guys. Nah, it must have been some sort of acoustical phenomenon. There's nothing below us but solid Staten Island. Don't even think twice about it, baby.
This really is very much in that Marvel vein where they're just like, it's real. It's Staten Island. Get it? You could go there, but it's hidden.
Cut back to Cobra Commander, and where we're kind of seeing the time limit of what's left in this mission. Their fuel situation is becoming critical. If the robot does not transmit the homing beacon within 10 minutes, we'll have to abort the mission. Cobra Commander is insistent that we wait until the last possible moment. I've waited too long to stage a full frontal assault on the Joe home base. It's been at least 2 issues. Far too long. The robot will succeed, and we shall destroy their command center. I want to take just a quick second as we continue to move through this issue to get your take on this helicopter that they're using.
I'm glad you said that, because I was going to ask you.
So, no toy of this. And to my knowledge, not something that makes, if it appears again, it's not often. Because it has like a kind of a snake vibe to it.
Yeah.
Pretty cool.
Why would you not make that? That is such a cool looking design.
Yeah, this is just from an era where they, out of necessity, would create the things that they needed, and I guess not everything made the cut. But yeah, I just wanted to take a minute to take a note of that. Something I haven't seen in a long time, and I was like, oh, that's actually a pretty cool, simple design that still obviously screams Cobra.
That would be such a cool toy, too.
So our other 3 guys have finally cut through the door. Stalker, Snake Eyes, and Flash are ready to join the fray, although it is evident that they're just in time to help clean up. So, as they are assembling or picking up the pieces of the robot, the head kind of comes to life, starts sprouting tentacles a la John Carpenter's The Thing, which, fun fact, was coming out in theaters about the exact same time that this issue came out. So, didn't steal from it. It's just a weird coincidence. Also kind of gives me some old Superpowers Brainiac ships vibes.
I was going to say that too. Like, it almost looks like Brainiac ship just flying.
So, sprouts some tentacles and starts climbing up the shaft. It's going to do whatever it takes to get to the surface. It's a pretty determined robot. Flash is like, well, no big deal. Zap. And gives it a good shot, puts a big hole in it. The head falls to the ground, pops up, and little robo bugs start popping out of it. Stalker smashes one, and Breaker picks one up and goes, this is a walking transmitter with a homing device. So, yet again, the robot has even more little plans in order to complete its mission. Clutch picks it up and says, well, could have been at least a dozen in here. So, we just smashed one. We got 11 left. So, they split up because they got to smash every single one. If even one makes it to the surface, then their goose is cooked.
Look, can I just say that was faulty planning on the robot's part? It was so smart up until then. Why didn't it send out the little bugs when it was still the big robot?
Maybe they were a part of the CPU that was required to operate the big robot.
There you go. That's all I need.
Just mail me that no prize. It's never too late. 2 more short scenes where Hawk and Scarlet are like, hey, there's a bunch of stuff going on beneath us. And Hawk's like, well, we can't do anything until the tea is over. You guys could have probably been like, I'm sure they're not the only 2 hosts there. They could have easily been like, we're going to go check on something real quick, drink your tea, and help.
We have a religious emergency. We'll get it.
But okay, that's fine. And then also another short scene where they are also drilling in the point that, hey, the robot signal is way past overdue. Now we're down to only 3 minutes left. Cobra Commander is like, we will wait the full 3 minutes. I paid for this Uber. You've got to get my money's out of it. All right, so cut to several scenes of, Clutch swats a robot. Stalker stomps on a robot. Flash opens up the ventilation unit, zaps a robot. Breaker gets into the internal sensors and gets the blast doors back in operation. All the sensors are up. No big deal. Stalker comes in and says, all right, start tracking them because we're missing one still. Breaker turns on the old sensors and they finds the last one. It's within inches of the surface grade of the motor pool. We'll never stop it in time. Cobra's going to be on us like flies on a cow pie. Let me do that again. Cobra's going to be on us like flies on a cow pie. As soon as that little transmitter starts bleeping, we've had it. One of the visitors for the tea notices something moving under the grate, and it's the last little robot bug. And he screams out, "It's a bug, an insect." To which Scarlet promptly responds, "Is that all, Padre? We're used to that around the motor pool." She gives the old scruncheroo, and the little robot pieces fall down on the Stalker and Flash's head. Cut to Cobra Commander. It says, 3 minutes are up. We must terminate this mission. And Cobra Commander says, order all units to return to Cobra Central. Luckily, we have more than one plan to destroy G.I. Joe. As a matter of fact, we got a whole bunch.
Foreshadowing.
And then at the very end of this issue, Hawk and Scarlet are once again calming everyone's nerves at the tea. Hawk turns to Scarlet and says, Scarlet, I may have been pushing the Joes a bit too hard lately. I think I'll recommend them for a little extra leave time. To which Scarlet says, good idea, Hawk. Sounds like they're going a buggy down there.
She needs to put on sunglasses after saying that.
Yeah!
I love the idea that all of Cobra's forces are just hovering, somewhere in Staten Island-ish.
Right, they've got a pretty wide radius.
Sitting there looking at their watches, like, are we going to do this?
So, before I ask you to kind of give me your thoughts on this issue and science fiction and G.I. Joe in particular, I did want to mention something that we talked about in the last episode, which is they did also release a comic book 3-pack of these in 2004. They put a 3-pack out for issue 1. They put a 3-pack out for issue 2. And they put a 3-pack out for this one as well. And they kind of continued the theme of releasing characters that are in this book. There's a Stalker figure, a Clutch figure, and a Hawk figure, which is labeled as General Abernathy because they still didn't have their like name licensing rights ironed out at this point. As a matter of fact, all of the characters are like Clutch is called Double Clutch, Stalker is called Sergeant Stalker. So I'm particularly fond of these figures. If you haven't seen them before, Jaren, because they basically get all the original 13 characters, and they're all still original O-rings, but they have way more authentic face sculpts. That's the big change in these figures, is that all of their faces way more accurately represent the characters that we're used to. I'm a big fan of this set. Most of the comic book 3-packs are pretty solid overall, and we'll take a quick look at them as we get to the issue that it corresponds to. But it's worth noting that there's kind of a string of them that we hit consecutively through these early issues, and I think they're all pretty great. Exceptions would be that Scarlet figure that I think is where she was in her kung fu outfit that's completely not good at all, and a poor replacement for what it would have been a much better authentic Scarlet figure. And then they also kind of I think there's a Grunt figure. There's a Grunt figure, and he's in like a space suit. So they made all the original 13. They made them all in their original like green military duds, and then they made a Grunt. No, Grunt is in a brown suit. They made somebody else in a space suit. I can't remember. Anyway, we'll get to it when we cover it. But they had a good thing going, and they shouldn't have broken that streak. But because they were so afraid to produce figures that were too similar, they made some deviations, and it kind of messed up the whole thing. With that out of the way, Jaren, what are your thoughts on this issue in general? And then let's talk briefly as we wrap up this episode about science fiction in the G.I. Joe universe.
I thought this was a fun issue. I think of the three, it was, I don't know, it felt the most, I'm trying to think of the word for it, just kind of, I don't want to say disjointed, but it just felt kind of, it might just be a little more out there, I guess. Probably part of having the sci-fi. It was just, I mean, it was really fun. Don't get me wrong. I actually liked a lot of the humor. I loved Zap trying to make jokes early on, as they're going down, and he says you're about as serious as a stomach wound. I thought that was fun. I liked kind of the world building they're doing. I actually enjoy seeing kind of the little bit more weird, just because I think it would get a little too repetitive if it was just, oh look, we shoot Cobra and they shoot us. I think bringing in something weird. I love the name of it.
Trojan Gambit.
In reference with the Trojan horse. Like it's kind of going in and they think it's one thing and then it ends up not being exactly what they thought. And then still seeing Joe find the Joe members kind of finding a way. It helped kind of differentiate some of the characters, which, I mean, it still is hard for me, unless I see someone chewing bubblegum or unless I see that giant red vest on the front, it's still a little bit hard to kind of differentiate. So I'll have to, like, kind of go back, okay, well, this is who. But overall, a really fun issue. I'm excited to see what they do next. And see kind of, one of the other, we have more than one ways to destroy G.I. Joe. See what the next plan is. It does, I think probably, to go back to my original point, I think the biggest thing is it's just so separate from the second issue. And I guess that's what they're doing, is they're just telling their own stories. But as of right now, and I don't know if it continues this way, but there's not a whole lot of connection between issues.
I think anytime you're trying to tell a self-contained story in a comic book, you are automatically racing against the clock, because you have to get a lot of information and a lot of stuff has to happen at kind of an aggressive pace. And so I think the storytelling suffers a little bit as a result. But I will give Larry credit. Every issue that we've read thus far, you do start to learn a little bit about at least one character. And so the hope is that by the time we get to issue 11, which is when newer characters start to be introduced, we've learned enough about the original 13 that you could maybe not break them down, character by character, but you know who's who, essentially. Yeah. And from issue 11 on, it gets way easier because everybody's got their own unique outfits.
Yeah. That's really the most difficult thing. Most of them are just in green outfits.
Yeah. And I was the same way. When I was a kid, it was very hard for me to tell, remembering specific characters, because the figures themselves, reuse so many parts that they, unless you had a favorite, and if you weren't reading the comic, I really don't know how you did it. It was hard to differentiate between who's who. But I like this issue. And I am, if I didn't make it clear in the beginning, I'm a pretty big proponent of science fiction elements in the G.I. Joe universe. This issue makes me think of, well, science fiction in the G.I. Joe universe in general always kind of makes me think of Metal Gear Solid, which is a universe that's based around a lot of authentic military discussion, but then has almost a insane science fiction element introduced to it. And I don't think I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Of course, I think maybe we've talked about this before, but I have a reputation as being a very forgiving critic of G.I. Joe in general. I kind of like everything that they do. Or, to put it better, I will accept the challenge to find a way to incorporate every idea that's introduced in G.I. Joe, no matter how ridiculous it is. And sometimes you got guys that have snake tails, and that's extremely challenging. And other times I'm just like, yeah, big robot, sure, it's not that outside the realm of possibility. It is. There are a lot of unreasonable aspects of it, but I'm willing to kind of overlook that stuff for the spirit of an interesting concept. So a lot of stuff that happens in the G.I. Joe universe, I am just kind of take it with a grain of salt. In our original recap, where we were looking at newer issues of G.I. Joe, we looked at the brainwave scanner, which in and of itself is not only an incredibly overused piece of technology, but is in itself a pretty outlandish piece of science fiction, in that it reads brains and it rewrites people's brains and brainwashes them. It's not so far-fetched. I mean, like, you have things like the Manchurian Candidate that are, it's based on, it is a work of fiction. It's not so far-fetched. And the G.I. Joe universe itself does teeter a little bit on the absurd sometimes, and there will be bigger examples of that later. But overall, I think it's perfectly fine. I think that, to your point, that a truly only authentic military book would become, maybe tedious isn't the right word, but it would become extremely challenging to have written and created for over this much amount of time. And the more you look at the characters of the G.I. Joe universe, and the Cobra universe especially, the more you have to just kind of be like, just roll with it, because these characters are in themselves like fantastical and extremely exaggerated. So why not ratchet that up just a little bit and see where it goes.
Plus, especially as we get into the new characters and stuff, they get a little bit more out there and a little more exotic, So it's fun. I'm glad that they did it, because I don't think I would want to read a story that was just strictly realistic. But who knows? Maybe in an alternate universe they would have done well that way too.
Yeah, I mean, I would have to say that in a universe where you have as much stuff like this going on, that the only way to really embrace it all and enjoy it all is to just go with the philosophy that anything Joe's. Oh, see what I did there? Brought it back around.
That was great.
Speaking of anything Joe's, be sure to follow us on our social media accounts. You can find us on Twitter and Instagram at Anything Joe's Pod. You can find us on Facebook at Anything Joe's Podcast as well. And don't forget that we have a YouTube channel listed as Anything Joe's also. You can email us directly at anythingjoespodcast@gmail.com, and we would love to hear from you. And that's going to do it. So thanks so much again for joining us, and be sure to tune in next time where anything's available for discussion here on Anything Joe's.